Hi friends, Kevin here, just reminding you that tickets are now on sale for Philly Who's next live episode. It'll take place on May 1st on the main stage of World Cafe Live, where I'll sit down with Mike Salmanov and Steve Cook to hear how they became two of Philadelphia's most popular celebrity restaurateurs. They'll share the inspirations behind Zahav, Federal Donuts, Dizengoff, Abe Fisher, The Rooster, and Goldie. We'll then be joined on stage by past Philly Who guests Jesse Ito of Royal Sushi and Izakaya and Becca Craig of Cake Life Bake Shop and the Food Network. They'll share updates to their story since we last heard from them, and then all four Philly food heavyweights will have a round-table discussion about the Philly food scene. Audience members will be able to submit questions in advance, and everybody will get a free taste of Cook and Solo's newest restaurant coming in June. May 1st is also the 1-year anniversary of the launch of Philly Who, so it'll be a podcast birthday party. Hope to see you there.
It's incredibly ironic. The irony is not lost on me that I've gone from someone who was very skeptical and reluctant to move here to one of the biggest boosters of the city and doing something that is going to really transform the city.
You're listening to Philly Who, the podcast that tells the stories of the doers, thinkers, and performers of Philadelphia. My name is Kevin Schmidlin, and today I'm chatting with David Gutstadt, the CEO and founder of the Fittler Club, a private lifestyle club set to open soon at 24th and Market. If you ask David, he didn't expect to end up moving his career to Philadelphia. After graduating from Princeton, he took a finance career in New York, but after he fell in love with and married a Philly girl, his destiny made its way down the New Jersey Turnpike.
I said I was never going to move to Philadelphia. And I said, well, I guess you can measure never for me, because apparently if I say never, it just means, plus or minus 15 years. So
now that the Toronto native is here to stay, he's determined to make the Fittler Club a collaborative space for the city's creatives, entrepreneurs, and leaders.
If we put our heads together, maybe we can take a different approach to how we tackle impact investing in the city of Philadelphia.
As you'll hear, David's received a huge amount of support for this idea, both socially and financially. And though he set the standard of this project incredibly high, the stakes are even higher.
Things are going to go right. Failure is not an option with a project like this. I mean, you don't build a 110,000 square foot club with the risk that it's not going to work out.
Find out how he got here and why the upcoming Fittler Club has become his passion. Now on Philly Who.
I said, I have to do this. It became a beyond a mission. It was a calling. And I said, I have to do this.
Just a heads up, there actually isn't any cursing in this episode, but there wasn't really a good spot for me to break and thank our sponsor. So I'm going to thank our sponsor right now, and then the entire conversation will be uninterrupted. Stay tuned. This episode of Philly Who is supported by the Civic, an adaptive reuse apartment building at 16th and Girard, where I used to live. What used to be a hospital is now well-designed micro, studio, 1- and 2-bedroom apartment homes for rent. True to its roots, the Civic is centered around hospitality and community and has amenities including a roof deck, an art gallery, a doorman, a golf simulator room, a pet grooming station, and more. To learn more, to book a tour, or to just thank them for supporting the show, visit thecivicphl.com/Philly Who. The link is in the show notes. So, to take on a project as ambitious and grandiose for Philly standards as the Fittler Club, you have to have a certain mindset. These types of things can take years, even decades, to come to fruition. And it's not something you can get through on passion alone. So when I sat down with David, I wanted to learn what made him take on such a daunting project. But I quickly learned that when it comes to persistence, David is a seasoned veteran. His mental toughness comes from his athletic background, where he excels in endurance sports, like to the extreme. He's completed multiple Ironman triathlons, which consists of a 2.4-mile swim, then a 112-mile bike ride, and then a full marathon with no breaks. To put that in perspective, that's almost exactly the same distance you would travel if you did the Broad Street run, but instead of stopping at the Navy Yard, you stopped at the White House. Not surprisingly, David has been into playing sports his entire life.
I grew up playing every sport you could imagine with a particular affinity for hockey, soccer, and tennis, which became my lifelong passion. And there's something about the discipline and the rigor and the commitment to something. Mm-hmm. And for me, that something has always been diving deep into a sport, for instance. And I discovered a talent and an affinity for the longer distance running. And I always enjoyed cycling, and it just kind of grew out of a desire to push myself to try something that was way out of my comfort zone. And I actually couldn't swim as a child. And I learned how to swim 12 years ago when I signed up for my first triathlon.
Wow. So knowing that you had never swam before, you signed up for a triathlon. What was that decision-making process like?
So my wife and I were always running buddies. And when she got pregnant with our first, who's now 12, she moved from the roads into the pool. And so in an effort to continue to work out together and do stuff together, I said, well, wouldn't it be great if, and I essentially got a 6-pack of swimming lessons at some, health club in New York and learned how to swim. And from there it was triathlon, sprint triathlon, Olympic, half iron, all the way into full on Ironman, which is something I've continued to, through August of this year.
Wow. Has there been a moment where you said you like to push yourself physically in that regard? Have you found any walls anywhere?
Every once in a while, you encounter a wall. It was 4 years ago. I did an Ironman up in Mont Tremblant, and I had actually raced an Ironman 7 weeks prior down at the Jersey Shore, and highly non-advisable to go and do these things 7 weeks apart. But I was feeling really good, and I hit the halfway part of the run in the Ironman at Mont Tremblant, and literally hit the proverbial wall where my legs physically stopped working, and I ended up walking a half a marathon, which was, first time I'd ever really failed in my parlance in that type of a situation.
Well, you got to find where the wall is, and then now you know.
Yes,
right?
Exactly.
You just go look for other walls. So let's back it up. When I mention your upbringing in and around Toronto, what are the first things that come to mind?
A city that I loved a tremendous amount. I really have fond memories of growing up in Toronto and being a Canadian and having that kind of upbringing where you lived in, pretty suburban area of Toronto. It wasn't really I was never really a city kid, but just, great memories of being with my family, the home that you grow up in, brother, sister, parents, and friends, some of whom I'm still friendly with today.
Do you ever go back?
We go back typically, I try and get back twice a year. We have a nice long trip in the summer, which is always fun.
Now, at what point did you start playing tennis?
I think someone put a racket in my hand when I was 3 years old.
Wow, that's soon.
Oh yeah, yes.
So you know nothing but playing tennis.
Yes. I was always, I guess my parents said I was always just obsessed with sports. All I wanted to do was sports. So
that's interesting. And then you wound up coming to the States you were recruited for tennis, right?
That's right. I was a nationally ranked tennis player and trained, over the course of a number of summers and all the school breaks down in an academy in Florida. And I was recruited by a bunch of the top colleges to play tennis.
And you wound up going to Princeton.
That's right.
And so why did you choose Princeton?
It's funny. I had never even heard of Princeton. I didn't know where it was. I couldn't put it on a map if my life depended on it. And my parents essentially said, you got into Princeton. You should go to Princeton.
You're going there.
Yeah.
That's cool. So did you play all 4 years?
No, I played my first two years, and I was frankly pretty burnt out even by the time I got there. So for me to have survived my freshman and most of my sophomore year on the tennis team was pretty heroic. And I was looking for, the opportunity. You sacrifice a lot certainly going through high school. You can imagine every time your friends are going out, you've got a tennis tournament or you're practicing, or I can't go to this thing on the weekend because I've got to be out and, God knows where. And, you give up a lot. And I think when I got to college, it was time for me to live a little.
Was it hard to tell everyone that you weren't going to be playing tennis anymore?
No, I think the folks who were most invested in my career were obviously me and my parents and my dad in particular. And the goal was always to get into college and use it as a tool to, get me to where I wanted to get. And, given that the Ivies don't have athletic scholarships, it was less of a big deal for me to stop playing. It wasn't like I was losing my scholarship. I mean, I had some financial aid. Princeton couldn't take away my financial aid because I stopped playing a sport.
They would
have a problem with that. Yeah.
Yeah. So it was just, it had served its purpose at that point.
Exactly.
And you were ready to move on.
Yeah.
Gotcha. So then you graduate Princeton, and what's your plan?
So when you go to school like Princeton, you're very much you're on a track. And, while we all like to think that we could have done anything, you're kind of steered into certain directions. And so a lot of my peer set at Princeton ended up going and taking jobs in management consulting or investment banking. I happened to be interested in real estate. And so my affinity for real estate led to a job in a real estate group at an investment bank, which happened to be Goldman Sachs.
Okay. So you move up to New York. Now, what about real estate drew you?
I just was always fascinated by cities and just like, how does an urban environment work? And it was less specific as like, oh, I want to learn how to, build an office building, or I want to, understand this, that, or the other about real estate. And it was just more about urban fabric and understanding, how a city comes together. And so to me, it was real estate in the abstract, but obviously became very much real estate in the specific once I started working.
Yeah. So when a college graduate says, I want to do real estate, I mean, that's so abstract. That could be anything. So where did they put you?
So I ended up in a group that did mortgage-backed securities, and I was on the origination side of things. So it was literally learning the nuts and bolts of real estate. So there's a mall, go visit the mall, make sure the tenants are who they say they are.
Oh, wow. So you were pretty hands-on.
Yeah. Yeah.
And did you enjoy that?
I did. And I did that for a couple of years before moving into, another silo of real estate, which is more advising companies that happen to do real estate. And I fell into the area of hospitality, which is basically what I've been doing for, most of the, 20 years that I've been working.
Yeah. So you fell into hospitality, but you stayed there.
I did.
Why?
Well, because to me, it really embodied the most interesting things about the real estate and being an operating business where things like brand and operations matter. So it was the intersection of, you could have a building, and it can be an office building or an apartment building, and not to take away from what they do, but when you're dealing with office or apartments or retail, people show up, they rent office space for 10 years, and it's kind of, you set it and forget it. A hotel, empties and fills every night, and there's so many other elements to making it profitable and work. How is it positioned? What's the brand? How do you operate it? There's a lot of levers you can pull, and it was always just a little more interesting to me.
Yeah. So how long did you spend then in New York City?
On and off for 15 out of the last 20 years.
Yeah. And then what brought you to Philadelphia?
So I married I married a Philly girl. So that seems to be the way the story goes.
Right. So that you're going to be coming back here at some point. So
I said, I was never going to move to Philadelphia. And I said, well, I guess you can measure never for me, because apparently if I say never, it just means, plus or minus 15 years. So
how did that come up? Like, was that a hard conversation to have? Like, I imagine, did you even want to come to Philly?
It was a hard conversation to have, because I had a great job in New York, and I was obviously very successful in doing what I was doing in the world of finance. And it's a little scary when you're presented with a choice, and it's, I want to move to Philadelphia, and I'm like, okay, well, what am I going to do?
What
right?
about all this?
There's not a job waiting for me. I mean, I have to quit a job. I was with Morgan Stanley at the time, and it ended up working out in a way that clearly, led to me doing something even more amazing and better. But it was a big leap of faith. But obviously, I wanted to be in an environment where my wife was happy, my kids are happy, we could have a better life in Philadelphia. So
at what point did your perspective switch from being like, this is something that I have to do, to, oh, I like it here. Like, this is something that I want to do.
It's incredibly ironic. The irony is not lost on me that I've gone from someone who was very skeptical and reluctant to move here to one of the biggest boosters of the city, and doing something that is going to really transform the city.
That's... I would say most kind of people are. So Philly has a weird reputation around the country and the world. So, it's no surprise, and there's nothing wrong with the fact that you were a skeptic. I would say most people were. I mean, I was, right? I mean, I grew up in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, about an hour and a half north, and identified more with New York growing up, because Bethlehem's kind of equidistant between the two.
Sure. And
my dad's side of the family is from Jersey, more New York side. Really, the only time I ever came to Philly was to go to the stadiums, which
Right.
are really, they're kind of, out on the outskirts anyway. So yeah, I mean, I felt the same way.
Yeah.
I had never been downtown, and, I just was like, oh, Philly, like, oh, who goes there? Like there's nothing going on there. And this is only in 2010. And then I came toward Temple University and was like, oh my God, fell in love with the city. And now, like you, I'm one of the biggest proponents. I left a job in software to start a radio show talking about how great Philly is. Yeah. So it's funny how Philly does that to people, right?
It sure does.
Do you remember any sort of moments or times where you kind of looked around and were like, wait a minute, this is pretty great?
Yeah, it was interesting. So my career as someone who's been in hospitality was always working on either companies or projects or buying hotels that were all over the country, really all over the world. And so, especially my last run, which was with a company out in New York, which called Equinox, and the parent or the owner group was part of Related, which is a big development firm. I was actually brought in to oversee the growth of a new hotel company called Equinox Hotels. And so my job was to go find opportunities in all these quote unquote hot markets around the country. So it was Seattle and Nashville and Austin and Dallas and DC and Denver, and go over to London. And then I'd go visit these cities, and for the most part, they didn't even feel like real cities, right? You go to Austin and there's a lot of headlines about Apple moving $1 billion of investment there, or whatever, 10 billion, whatever the number is, and thousands of jobs. But you go see Austin, you go see Nashville, go to Portland. They're still very much startup cities. And when I say startup cities, I mean, there's no history, the culture there is still emerging. And, downtown is like, a quarter of the size of downtown Philadelphia. So it was just really brought to focus for me how Philly is a real city, and it's got so much history, so much tradition. It's a true world-class city, and we weren't getting our due. And so I wanted to do something that gave Philly its due. And I think a little bit was also spawned from some of the folks I work with in prior jobs, kind of looking down their nose at Philly, and it's like, oh, why would you want to be in Philly? Oh, we're not going to consider a project in Philadelphia. What's in Philly? Where's the money? Where's the excitement? And I was like, I'm pretty sure there's all of these things in Philadelphia.
It's like, have you guys been there?
Just
it's an hour and a half
away. Just
away.
New York or from LA or San Francisco, it doesn't. It was one of these things where I was like, okay, I think I'm going to show you.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I feel the same way. And sometimes I worry. I'm like, oh man, are we going to be ruining this by getting the word out? Because it is pretty great that it's such an underdog. So yeah, you had this idea. Tell me about the moment that the idea clicked in your head to do something that would elevate the city in the way that you're trying to do.
Sure. So I've obviously spent a lot of time, my whole career has been defined by studying brands and hospitality and really understanding, not just what's popular today, but where are things going. And I became really intrigued when I was working with Equinox with the whole concept of not just the fitness club business, but the private club business, and really sparked by Soho House. Soho House has done an excellent job really reinventing the urban social club. But I realized quickly that in New York, as an example, they didn't want finance people, right? If you wore a suit and a tie, you're not welcome at Soho House. They, in fact, purged thousands of wealthy, high-paying, and I'm sure perfectly fine people just because they weren't in the right industry. And it just struck me as a little odd. And then I spent some time out in San Francisco when I was looking at projects, and I got to stay at this club called The Battery, which was, essentially San Francisco's version of a Soho House, but geared much more around true community, agnostic to industry or kind of walk of life. And there was a philanthropic piece to what they were doing. And the whole thing clicked when I did a couple nights there and was working out in their gym, and they had a very acceptable gym there. It was like staying at a nice hotel with a beautiful amenity gym. And I was chatting with the woman who works there, and I was trying to figure out what the story is. And she's like, oh, it's another $70 a month for our members to use our gym, but most don't use it. I said, oh, why not? She goes, yeah, most of them are members of the Equinox across the street, which is like $200 a month. So I'm like, wait a minute. Why would you build a place where then your members go somewhere else and spend more money elsewhere than they're actually spending in your club?
Yeah.
And so it all clicked. And I was like, okay, well, if you took the best elements of a Soho House and an Equinox and, you throw in a little of the collaborative workspace, kind of an elevated version of what WeWork is doing, or kind of more akin to like a Neue House.
Yeah.
You've got something, and it really does address all the shortcomings, and at least in my mind, of the issues of just belonging to one thing. Like, why do I have to be a member of X, Y, and Z? What if X, Y, and Z were all in one place?
Yeah.
And that's what Fitler Club is.
So you have this idea, Now, did you at that point think that you would be the one to start and lead this idea?
Yes, I said I have to do this. It became a beyond a mission. It was a calling.
Yeah.
And I said, I have to do this.
Had you been in this sort of CEO/entrepreneurial type position before?
So the role I was in at the time, I was brought in to create a company for Equinox, which was Equinox Hotels. And so I like to joke that I kind of did it with the training wheels on first, and then I took the full leap that I could just do this on my own.
Yeah. And did you just get started right away? Like, who was the first person you told about this idea?
Outside of my immediate family, the first person I chatted with was actually the person who ended up being my main investor. It was a guy named Michael Foreman who runs Franklin Square Investments. And we were actually talking about something totally different and tangential to anything I was doing. And it was more of a social dialogue at the time. And I said, hey, I'm thinking about this. What do you think? He goes, I love it. Find a site and let's do it.
Let's go.
And that was
just like that.
Yeah, just like that.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
He got it immediately.
So Philly is a historically blue-collar town. We're very prideful, but also very proud of our bootstraps.
Mm-hmm.
So did you find any resistance to this sort of more like high luxury type establishment at first, or still?
No, not really. I mean, it's interesting. I know Philly's got the reputation, but there's a tremendous amount of history embedded in the city. And, with history comes wealth. And I think, the city has done a great job kind of transitioning itself from a blue collar city to a much more diverse city. So what's driving the city now? Eds and meds. I mean, those are not, those aren't, not that there's anything wrong with blue collar, but those are not blue collar jobs. Right. And you look at what Comcast is doing, you look at what Five Below and Urban, and there's a huge amount of financial firms. They're not based in the city proper, but I mean, headquarters and major companies. And it's really impressive what's gone on here. Susquehanna is a good example. So there's a lot of diversity in the city. It's just, I feel like it's a little bit of a marketing issue for Philadelphia, more so than anything.
I mean, it goes back to what we were saying before, how, we were saying how everyone else outside, doesn't know what's going on. Sometimes we don't even, we right. have distorted views of what we have here. Now, if you sort of consume the story and what's out there now about Fiddler Club, it's all pretty rosy. Mm-hmm. Have there been any moments of doubt or of extreme struggle where you're like, man, this isn't going well. I don't know if this is going to work?
So I know it's not it's not the answer people want to hear, but it knock on wood, things have actually been really according to plan on the club. And I will say, I'll give myself a little bit of credit, which is coming up with a very, very deliberate and intentional plan in terms of how we're going to attack each phase. And we have a team, and the team is bought in 100%, and we set benchmarks and we set goals, and we hit or exceed them every time. And I'm sure we will hit roadblocks. I mean, yeah. I like to say this is the easy part and this is hard, but the easy part is getting the thing built and designed. I mean, the harder part is going to be, showing that we can execute and delivering on the promise, but I'm confident that we'll get there too.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, I think what I see here is it just shades of the way you approach, I think, the endurance sports, right? Like, it sounds to me like you set out this plan. It's like, all right, this is going to be 2-3 years until we even open the doors. And so everyone strap in because this is going to be a long haul. Is that the way you'd say you approached it?
Yeah. And look, we raised money from a really diverse group of investors, and everyone said, what happens if things don't go right? I said, things are going to go right. Failure is not an option with a project like this. I mean, you don't build 110,000 square foot club and invest $30-40 million with the risk that it's not going to work out. It's going to work out. It may work out differently than you thought 2 years ago, but we've got plans A, B, C, and D to cover pretty much every eventuality.
Yeah, and also what you're saying kind of brings shades of having done sort of a few different entrepreneurial ventures, most of which have, well, really all of them, which have failed. There's this magical time before like launch, as it were, mm-hmm. whether it's launching an app or opening a studio or something like that, where it could be anything. You're just like, it's going to be great. It's going to be great. And it's kind of energizing to put in hard hours and everything like that. And then once it launches and it may not be an overnight success, that can be some of the most discouraging moments. So do you guys have a plan for, I guess, growth after launch? Like, after you open the doors, what's your next move?
So because of the way the project works, right, we've been under construction for well over a year at this point, and we've pre-sold a tremendous number of memberships, and it's been fascinating because what we realized is we didn't even have the enough program for the demand that we have for certain things. So we had people that wanted to take workspace in our small co-working component, and so it led to us actually creating another company, which is Offsite, where we've got 34,000 square feet of space. And now we've got really a who's who of Philadelphia coming to office in a space that literally is connected to and managed by the club. And that wasn't in my plan day one. And there was a lot of interest in some of our other more fun amenities like pools and outdoor space. And we have a top secret project going on right now, which hopefully is not top secret when this podcast launches, that will be a just mind-blowingly game-changing thing for the city if we can get it done.
Yeah. So you've, I guess, just had your ear to the rail on feedback and thought, okay, as you've received this demand that may have not matched the plan that you had in mind, have just adapted the plan accordingly?
Yeah. I mean, look, I think if I had said originally I wanted to do the original club plus another 34,000 feet, plus another 22,000 feet of this other very expensive project, I think we would have gotten a few raised eyebrows. And it's like, okay, stick to this first concept and then let's see where we go. Well, we know where we are now, which is great.
So how has the founder CEO life compared to when you had the training wheels on? Are there any surprises that the training wheels may not have sort of prepared you for?
I think there are some elements to my day-to-day that are a little different from my prior roles, but I mean, I've always been a person that just goes all in on everything. And so there's really nothing that I'm doing today that is any different from the way I was approaching, whether it was my roles with Related and Equinox or prior at Goldman or Morgan Stanley or any of my other jobs, where I want to be involved in as much as I can. I still delegate. I think the biggest difference is now there's a lot more need for me to really be smart about my time and say, okay, take yourself out of this. You've got people who can handle this. Focus on where I'm going to add the most value, because obviously time is our most precious resource over the course of a day.
Oh, totally. Yeah. No, that's a good lesson, I think, for any entrepreneur who, or really anybody who's leading a team and kind of gets caught up in the weeds. Sometimes the people may do a better job than you do at this thing. So
I know there are definitely things where my team is better equipped to handle things than I am.
Yeah.
And I think as with everything, right, there's a level of trust that you build up. So people who've been working with me now for the better part of a year, I think we've started to learn each other's style. And so, know to include me in certain things, know that I'm fine not ever even hearing about certain things.
Yeah. That's key sometimes. Yeah. Don't even tell me about it. Just
right. Yeah. I don't want to know. Just do it.
Yeah. So you've said that you're going to view the club as a voice of good and change in Philadelphia. How is that going to be?
So, equally important to me is creating a place where people can build community and have fun. It seemed to me like it would be truthfully criminal, right, if we didn't use this as a platform to help bring change and positivity to the city of Philadelphia. And so we actually made a non-economic decision, which is taking money that otherwise should go to investors, but we all agreed going in that we would allocate a meaningful capital on the order of $250,000 by the time we open that would actually seed a foundation that would go back to benefit the city of Philadelphia and the people of Philadelphia in a number of ways. And it's, ties in philanthropy, it ties in impact investing, it ties in mentorship and creating job opportunities, and it ties in really scholarship and sponsorship for people who should be part of the community of the club to actually have access, not just to the club, but to its members, and to be able to showcase whether they're emerging artists or working at a nonprofit, or athletes who, need a place to call their home. That was a really important part to me. And it was actually amazing to get my investors, including Admiral Capital, which is founded by the great basketball player David Robinson, who I think a lot of people don't realize is one of the great humanitarians and kind of post-athletic career philanthropists of the modern age.
Yeah. Why do you think it would be a crime, though, to not do those things?
Because we're assembling a group of 2,000 thinkers, connectors, influencers, leaders And, there's never been a place where all these people can get together and kind of share ideas and create, really, really bring all of these incredible energies together to say, okay, well, if we put our heads together, maybe we can take a different approach to how we tackle, impact investing in the city of Philadelphia, or, supporting, the right programs for educating youth, or, dealing with any other issues that are important to our members.
Yeah. I think just when hearing about this, or really like a year and a half ago, wondering how you guys would approach being exclusive and inclusive at the same time. And I'm sure folks have brought that up to you on occasion.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, we've always said the club wants to be and needs to be diverse and inclusive. And so we're truly agnostic. I mean, everyone talks about demographics, and we're not about demographics. We're about a psychographic, right? So if you identify with what we're about, design, community, the city of Philadelphia, being passionate about, making the city great, and you have the qualities of leadership, you're a connector, you're influential in your field. Again, it could be an educator, it could be a medical practitioner, it could be a finance person, right? Agnostic. We just want that person. And so, my view always is we're being inclusive in that regard. But, we are still a place for someone, who is achieving at the top of their field. And so if someone, for example, can't afford to join the club, but they are still characterized as a leader in their field, that's why we've launched this foundation, so that they can be part of the community. But at the end of the day, we're also a business, and I've got a hefty lease and operating expenses to cover. So, paying members are an important part of it, but it's really the right folks. I mean, we have way more people interested in the club than we can accommodate. So it gives us the luxury to say, okay, let's make sure we're building the community in the right way.
Yeah, that's cool. So now let's talk forward. Mm-hmm. Describe to me the moment where you sit down, look at what you've built with this club, and say, we did it.
Well, I think when I'm having a drink on our outdoor terrace in, call it the spring, and the club is full of people, and it looks like what we think it's going to look like, and people are enjoying themselves and doing, we see this at every event we've had. We've had probably a dozen member events where we bring these groups of people together over cocktails, and it's unbelievable. I mean, we're seeing people meet each other for the first time. Everyone always talks about how small Philly is, but Philly's a big city. It's not that small, and we're bringing together groups of people that have never had the opportunity to interact with each other, and they are now, and they're becoming friends, and they're making plans, and they're talking about new business ideas and getting together socially, and it's amazing. And so I'm seeing that happen on a very small scale. So I know it's going to work because we're seeing it, but seeing it come together in the space is going to be really exciting and rewarding. So I project kind of sometime in April, when I take a deep breath and we're operational, we can get the outdoor stuff going. That'll be that moment.
That'll be a pretty cool moment for you.
Yeah.
So I have a couple questions that I ask every guest. What would you say is a common misconception about you?
So I think there is, I don't know if this is so much a misconception, but having grown up in Toronto and being Canadian, we present as very nice. And I think there are folks who confuse nice with pushover.
Yeah.
And so there is there's an element of me that's insanely competitive. I think I present very differently. So, I will be, always polite and charming. I'm not a yeller. I'll never, it's just not my style. So I'll never yell at someone. But, if I'm upset, I have my own way of letting people know. And it's just, I think it's conveyed differently. So I think that would be perhaps one misconception.
Yeah. If you could send a message to yourself at any point in the past, butterfly effect aside, would you? And if so, what would you say?
That's funny. I would say, the funny answer is I'd say, it's okay to ask, so I was very shy in middle and high school.
Go into
and,
that a little bit.
The idea of asking a girl out, was the most terrifying thing in the world. And, you learn as you get older, people say no to you a lot more in all sorts of different environments, right? Whether it's work, interviewing for a job, you hear no a lot, right? You interview for 10 jobs, you're not going to get 10 offers. And so that would be the advice I'd give my younger self, which is, it literally does not hurt to ask.
Yeah. Ask. You're in the same spot once they say no that you were before you asked
Right.
anyway.
No one's
So is
going to
that-
advertise your crushing disappointment that so-and-so didn't want to go to the, 7th grade dance with you.
It's really not the worst thing in the world.
It's not.
That's funny. I guess in the world of hospitality, as you see it, or just your perspective of Philadelphia, what would you say is the biggest challenge facing Philly today?
I think Philly's biggest issue is we haven't really, we've done a really good job in certain areas. So food and dining is off the charts. I mean, I would put us up against every other city in the in the country. Really, it's truly world class, national class. Where I think we lack is some of the other infrastructure, right? So if you look at, someone comes to town, where should I stay? I jokingly say New York, right? Because we don't have a great hotel, right? We have plenty of nice hotels, but I don't think we have a truly great hotel that would stand up against, the best of London and New York and LA and San Francisco and, some of the other great cities of the world. I think we will, right? I think Four Seasons coming is a great kind of indication of, I always used to joke about Toronto. Toronto had a terrible stock of hotels. There was an old Four Seasons, there was an old Royal York, and you go to Toronto now, and they get real rates, and there's beautiful hotels. And, I think it's a function of, like, sometimes if you build it, they literally will come, right? I mean, you have to give people an excuse and a reason to go and to stay and to spend money. I think we're really, really lacking in retail, in our kind of high street retail. So center city, urban, King of Prussia is obviously one of the great malls of the country, but it doesn't help center city Philadelphia, right? And, I don't know how that gets fixed. There are certainly enough people living and working in the city that could support more high street style retail. And it's slowly coming, but it hasn't come as fast as I would have liked it to.
Yeah. On the flip side, what excites you most about Philadelphia today?
I just feel like there's a buzz. There's a general excitement going on. And it's not just that we had the Pope and the convention and we won the Super Bowl. I mean, all these things help. But I think if you look around the city and see the energy, and still there's cranes everywhere, and there's youth and energy and people moving in here and cool stuff happening, not just in the core, but in Fishtown and Brewery Town and Graduate Hospital and other parts of South Philly and West Philly. It's amazing. And, people are like, well, what if the economy changed? But there's so much in process right now. Apartment buildings don't stay empty, right? They may lower their rents, but they're going to be full of people. So I think, office towers and all the stuff they're doing at the hospitals. I mean, when they get these massive buildings, then they're going to be filled with people, using them, with jobs, with, end users. So I just think it's really exciting what's going on right now.
For more on David and to check out the Fitler Club, you can head to podphillyhoo.com/Fitler. That's Fitler. As always, if you like the show, be sure to subscribe and give us a rating if you're on Apple Podcasts. You can follow along on Twitter and Instagram at PodPhillyWho. And for Philly Who news and announcements, or to keep up with the stories of previous guests of the show, you can join the email newsletter via podphillywho.com/email. Philly Who is a Q9 production. This episode's associate producer is Angela Gervasi, with editing by Max Graham, music by Lee Rosevere, and artwork by Lauren Carhart. For Philly Who, my name is Kevin Schmidlin. Till next time.